Hello and welcome to today's podcast. I'm Susan Guthrie, your host, and I'm so happy today because I am joined again by Dr. Elizabeth Cohen, the divorce doctor. Hi, Elizabeth. I'm so happy you're here.
Hi, Susan. I love being with you and your audience so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Well, and my audience loves you. Every time you're on the show, I get so much outreach from people. And what people don't know is some people reach out with some really serious questions. And I just want to, throw some props your way because I forward those to you right away, and you reach out to people with answers. And so we talk about some of these issues on the show, but others, we just pass on the information, but you're always so kind to my listeners and willing to reach out. So I want to thank you on their behalf.
Thank you. My pleasure.
And I'm just thrilled you're back. You and I just spent the past half hour talking to each other and catching up, but now we're going to dive into, we touched on it a bit ahead of time, but we are taping this episode on March 1st. So we are rolling around to the anniversary of COVID. We are 1 year in. And I said this to you earlier when we were talking. If we had known a year ago when we started hearing this COVID-19 and pandemic and all these words, if we had known what was ahead of us, I don't know how we would have, gotten through it. It's almost like ignorance was bliss at that time. I remember thinking and treating it as if it were just an extended snow day at first. And I was going to eat ice cream and hang out and Netflix and chill for a while or whatever, watch my binge on Netflix. And a year later, we live in a different world, and there's so much that comes from that.
Yeah.
And I've talked to so many people, and you and I have done episodes on the psychological impact of COVID and all of the different things. But, I'd love to hear your perspective on, because it was your idea to talk about this, and I'm really glad we are talking about this anniversary. So, let's what even made you think that this anniversary was something that we needed to cover?
I'm always so impressed also, Susan, with your willingness to dive into the mental health aspects of what's going on and how, for your audience, how much you really believe in the importance of understanding mental health in order to thrive. So I just want to thank you for being an advocate and giving me a platform to be able to talk about it. So thanks for that. The reason I wanted to talk about the anniversary is because what we have gone through in this world during this last year is a trauma. I've talked about it here before. It's an existential, ongoing trauma where our lives are in danger and are in threat. And with any trauma, anniversaries, reminders trigger intense reactions. So anyone who's lost someone prior to COVID knows what the first, Christmas or the first Hanukkah or the first birthday is like without the person who you loved. We are cyclical. And so we do have these emotional responses to anniversaries. And in my practice, I am noticing more and more people, unfortunately, saying things like, why am I not getting more used to this? Or why is this still bothering me? And so I think it's profoundly important to say, number one, I don't want you ever to get used to trauma. Please, I don't want you to get used to this. And know that not only are you not getting used to this, but this time of year is going to be increasingly more difficult because there's so much shame around discomfort. We've talked about that on this podcast before, that people think they're supposed to just conquer something because you've been in it for long enough, when actually that means you've had more cortisol seeping through your body, you've had more loss, you've had more grief. So why in any way would you then somehow get adjusted to it, or should it be easier? So I really wanted to bring this up so people could feel validated if they're struggling right now, which I know people are.
I love what what you just said about acknowledging the trauma and acknowledging where people are, because when you think about it, and I think for me, I was just thinking about, so we've cycled through a year living in a completely different way. And if we look back and I think of life before March of 2020 and life forever after
Yes.
2020, right? March of 2020, there's
Yes.
a dividing line there.
Yes.
And at 50 something, I don't know of any other time in my life where I would look back and say some seminal event occurred and life was infinitely different after that than before that. It's something that was completely out of our control.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, certainly you choose to get married, you choose to move somewhere, certain choices in our life. But the advent of COVID and the changes it has wrought into our world and the havoc it has wreaked was completely not by choice. And, so there's a powerlessness to it for people.
Absolutely. And one thing that I think I'm so glad you brought up powerlessness, because one of the things I've noticed personally, but I've also seen with my clients and was anticipating with this anniversary, is that we're getting to the point where we're not going to be able to say much longer, like last year on this day, I went to my dance class. Or last year at this, or get reminders from Facebook, but last year at this time you were out with your girlfriends for drinks, right? We're
Yes.
kind of coming up on and that's significant because people are beginning to feel this, oh my God, that was the last time that I had some control. And a year ago. And there's something psychologically about the year mark of, oh, a year ago, I was sitting and watching Netflix. I was in COVID already. There's something very particular to right now, which is this when you lost your freedom, essentially. Like because what happened was we went from a freedom to a lack of freedom and deep grief and deep loss really overnight. So I liken it to a car accident where you're driving along. It's a beautiful sunny day. You're driving through a green light and somebody, goes right into you who ran a light. There's nothing you could have done. You didn't see it coming. And then your life can be changed. And that's basically what happened for us. We didn't have any preparation time. And our nervous systems really need preparation time in order to feel settled. So we are all still shaking from what I consider a shock trauma of what happened on March 15th or March 17th. And I think about like before COVID, really like before COVID and after. I remember hearing on the news, one of the newscasters was, of course, in my perspective, I thought was being like really dramatic, like this is a big deal and they're not doing anything about. And my daughter, who's 13, said to me, I'm worried about this COVID that I heard about. And I remember sitting by her bed and saying, honey, a few years ago, there was Ebola. And here's what happened. 2 people came to New York. We live in New York with it. They isolated them. They figured it out. They treated them. And I remember that moment of reassurance in her face. And then to a week later, for us we fled from New York. I remember her saying, but you said it was going to be like Ebola, right?
Yeah.
And so that moment of not, just seeing in her eyes, but my experience of, I really thought we were going to be okay. And then suddenly we deeply were not okay. And that is really transformative. And I want people to understand that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and what you just said there, there was such a long stretch of this sinking in, I think, for so many people. As I said, I truly thought of it as this is going to be a couple of weeks.
Right.
We are all going to stay in our houses for a couple of weeks and then we'll go back to life as it was just a few weeks ago.
Right.
And then today, thinking 1 year later, I ran out this morning and you grab your car keys and your purse and your mask and your hand sanitizer and you head out the door and you don't think a thing of those are being the necessaries to get out the door and run to the grocery store. Right. And I get to the grocery store and I grab a wipe and I wipe down the cart and I've got my, and I go into hazmat mode. So
right.
It's just we've adapted. So you said you don't want people to get used to trauma. And what I would say is we have adapted to living in this different way. I don't think that means that we have grown accustomed to the trauma of it or grown accustomed.
No.
And and it's it's something as we start to feel, maybe hopefully in the next several months, we'll start to emerge from this time.
Mhm.
But how does that work with trauma?
Yeah.
So what's it like the first time you can go out without that mask on?
Right, right. So I'm gonna address that. At first, I just wanted to give a little tool and a tip, if that's okay, about
Oh, absolutely.
then and now. And then I want to talk about kind of going back into wearing how to release the mask.
Let it go.
Exactly. So one of the things that's really important when you've had a shock trauma, like I just discussed, is to be really clear around the anniversary about what was then and what is now. So just a few weeks ago, we were in the house where we had gone during COVID, and I was having a lot of trauma flashbacks, just feeling incredibly trapped. Like we were leaving the next day, but my body felt like I wasn't going to leave. And I just felt like I was back in 2020. And so I pulled out a piece of paper, made a line down the middle, and I wrote then and now. And this is what I would encourage everyone to do, to write down what was happening then and what is happening now. I am blessed and lucky enough to be double vaccinated, right? So in 1 year, we have a vaccine that will keep 95% keep people from getting this disease that only started a year ago. Like that is miraculous, right? We have that now. Back then, we didn't know if it spread on surfaces. We didn't know if it was airborne. We didn't know if we needed masks. Like it's really important to realize that so much we didn't know and what we do know now. You're still in your house, you're still wearing a mask. There are still some similarities, but there's some incredibly important distinctions that you want your nervous system to know. And I want to acknowledge that when you do this, there is also something underlying both then and now, which is deep grief. Even if you personally have not lost someone, as social beings, we are all touched by the enormity of lives that are lost. It is hanging over us. And so I want to also encourage people to allow that grief, to not just focus on when are we going to get out of here, but to know we're going to get out of here. I mean, we're going to move through it. We're going to get through this difficult time. And there's so much grief. It's similar to the work I do with divorce. It's like you have to do both. You can get excited about the next chapter, but you have to grieve the relationship. And so I guess I just want people to know that they really can do both. And going back to your question about the mask, I think the more you process the grief, the easier it will be to eventually step out into whatever our world looks like. And it will never look like it did before. It just won't. Just like when you're in a car accident, you're not going to drive a car ever in the same way.
Right. And that you say that and you mentioned grief, I'm thinking there is the loss of life. I just read the statistics this morning. We're well over 500,000 deaths here in the United States. We're over 2 million deaths worldwide. I mean, those numbers are hard to even really get your head around, but the grief goes so widespread from that. I mean, I talked to one friend who's grieving for her children who never got a real graduation.
Yes.
Was graduating from high school, one was graduating from college. And then college started for the one who graduated from high school, and it's remote college, so that child's still home. And just what you just said, we're never going back to 2019. We're never going to go back to that world. It is gone. The changes, some of them may be positive, some of them may be negative, but just grieving that we're never going back. And some of the things that are lost, people who couldn't get married with a big family wedding.
Right.
My friend went through cancer surgery and treatment and had to do it alone because I couldn't go with her, because of COVID. I mean, so there's so many levels of this grief.
Oh, yes, yes. And and the funerals, right? And the people who
Oh,
were in the hospitals and had to be alone. I mean, you're exactly right. There's so many levels of grief. And if we don't acknowledge them, we're not going to be able to move through this time. I mean, I think something else that's coming up, Susan, I don't know if people have talked to you about this, but my clients have, of this real fear. And I think this is related to the grief of getting back, of my clients, it feels like they think that someone's going to knock on the door and like push them out before they're ready. I mean, we joke that everyone has a bit of agoraphobia, and
yeah.
you have to remember, like, we're not going back overnight. Like, I keep telling people, I say that I shared this on this podcast, everything is like small steps that are measurable. Like, you're not going right back to anything. You're doing things that are slow, that are comfortable for you. So there isn't this need to jump, one way or the other. You don't have to jump into health or jump into, excitement just because you might be able to do that now. I really want to let people know that, because I'm hearing that a lot, like this, a lot of anxiety about, and by the way, if you're like, you can hear that if you're you're fully vaccinated, you can do something and not be scared. You might still be scared. You might need to take some slow steps. You might be able, quote unquote, to take your mask off, but not feel comfortable yet. Think about what you've been going through. Again, a trauma. It's like if you were in a car accident, you might not drive on the freeway for a little longer. You'll eventually get there, but maybe not the first day you're in the car.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's I mean, that is such a good point, because, I've actually noticed and felt that myself. You and I just were talking about, and I told you I'm going to soon see my mother, who I haven't seen since the holiday season of 2019. So over a year. And I don't think since I was born, I don't think I've not seen my mother in person since. So that's a good long time. But I'm also a little fearful about it, because I'm afraid, not for myself, but I'm afraid of anything happening to my mom. By the time I'll see her in a few weeks, she'll be double vaccinated. I will, be taking all precautions, but yeah, there's still anxiety around it.
Right. And I wonder,
That going forth.
right. And I wonder, Susan, what it would look like if you just were patient and compassionate with that and just said, you know what? Maybe I'll double mask, even though she's, whatever makes me feel more comfortable so that my nervous system can be at ease when we're together. Because what's most important is the two of you being together. And whatever's going to make you feel more comfortable in the moment, I would say do that. People are asking me, like, oh, especially for kids, like, oh, my kid's acting a little bit like showing some signs of obsessive compulsive disorder. Should I worry? And I keep saying, let's wait till this is over and see kind of where we net out, because obsessive compulsive disorder symptoms is actually adaptive right now. So I want to encourage you to focus on just connecting to your mom. If that means you have, face shields, whatever makes you feel comfortable, do that so that you can be at ease enough to connect.
Yeah. I think that's, something I think we'll all start, struggling with I feel like we're little animals that will slowly start emerging from our dens. Or like when I had a hamster when I was a kid growing up, and you'd look in there and all you'd see were the shavings, and all of a sudden this little, thing would pop out with the nose wiggling. I feel like a nose wiggling hamster.
Exactly, that it's going to take that time. And again, just like you need to acknowledge how challenging this anniversary date is going to be, I want you to also acknowledge, that it's going to take some time to slowly push out. We have such high expectations for us really not to have any emotions and any feelings. But I've said this over and over, the more you don't express your feelings, the more they come out sideways. I mean, you're going to have them. So if you just allow yourself to have them, it'll be better for you and everyone who you get to spend any time with.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder too, because this has occurred to me, and I just want to run it by you.
Yeah.
So COVID and this year that we've all gone through, we've talked about the trauma. It's been difficult. It's been literally life altering forever. But there've been positives as well. Like there have been things, that for some people have been positives. I wouldn't say everybody has experienced silver linings, but many people that I know have.
Mhm.
And is it seems to me there has to be value in acknowledging those silver linings,
Mhm.
and there's a guilt almost associated with that as well, though.
Yeah. So you know my favorite line about the golden and.
Yes.
So absolutely. I mean, there is deep grief and deep awareness of so much loss. And you personally can have had abundance. And I think that pushing that away is just like pushing away the negative emotion. It's not your full experience. You need to witness your full experience. Otherwise, you are not living your full best life. So I've said this, you can feel deeply, deeply sad that people have lost their lives, their loved ones, their jobs. It's devastating. I mean, I feel that in my core. And I also have been able to have lunch every day with my kids and my husband. I have been able to deeply slow down in a way that I don't know if I would have been able to without COVID. And it's not that, again, even as I say that, I can feel myself being like, well, don't forget about but it's not an either or, it's both. It's both. And no one needs, it's the whole idea, I think, of in a lot of racist work, like about white fragility. Like, you don't have to be like, oh, I feel so bad that I have it so good. Like, that doesn't help anybody. Just own, just right. It doesn't help anyone to be like, feel guilty, like that you have things, like you have things and people do not. And you can have both of those feelings at the same time.
Yeah. And I've talked to people, and one thing that I've had a lot of discussions about
Mhm.
for people, and this might resonate with my listeners, because there's been such a focus on the negative effects of what you just talked about, being in your home for this very extended, very claustrophobic period of time
Yeah.
with your family. But you just referenced it, and I would reference it the same way, as a positive. We've gotten that opportunity to spend more time with our loved ones, our family. Has it always been easy? No. I mean,
Right.
you get that
Right.
many people under a roof. It's not always easy, but there's been such a societal focus on the negativity of being, and I hear words like trapped in the
Yes.
house together.
Yes.
Marriage, the divorce rates skyrocketing because of
Yes.
it. And that's
Yes.
not necessarily true.
I'm really glad you're bringing this up because I want to talk about also the opportunity that people have had to build different muscles. So I know for me, with my teenagers, both of them have had periods of deep struggle during this. And if it wasn't COVID, in some ways, and I wished for this, trust me, they would go to school. And then by the end of the day, when they got home from school, maybe they didn't want to talk about it. And we could kind of like it could blow over. I had to deal with it, right? They were here, they were crying, they were in need. I had to cancel clients. Like, I had to practice this muscle of crisis intervention with my kids. And I now know I can have that. And I will need that muscle in my life with them at different times. And so I do think, even in marriages that are really struggling, you've probably had to do things and say things and confront things and manage things that you wouldn't have had to otherwise. And it sucks. And there is, post-traumatic growth. There is something that happens where we learn a muscle by practicing.
Yeah. And it's brought those situations for so many people home. I always talk about the experience of mediation,
Yeah.
and people come in and, usually a couple that has reached the point of divorce is not in a position of stellar communication. Something has usually broken down with that, but part of the mediation process and part of what a good skilled mediator would do in facilitating their conversation is help them learn new pathways of communication, how to phrase things, how to talk to each other again. And in many ways, COVID has been kind of a, incubator for people having to learn how to communicate in new ways. I love your phrase of, building a new muscle or strengthening a muscle that we already have. And, that's a silver, maybe not a silver lining, but it is a positive coping mechanism, I guess that I would call it, or effect, for so many of us. And if, I I like looking at it from that perspective as opposed to from the, well, it's all been so hard and it's COVID's fault. In fact, COVID shone a light on something maybe.
Exactly. I'm going to give you a very, privileged example that I will admit as a New Yorker who lives in New York City. So we've always had someone clean our house. And in fact, a few years ago, I had someone come every day to clean our house because I just hate mess and do not like cleaning. Well, COVID hit and I had to learn how to clean. And I now have a Saturday mornings. First of all, I have this whole routine where I clean. I also clean a little bit each day. My kids clean their own room. My kids clean their bath. It's required me and all of us to learn a skill we didn't have. Now that's a very small, frivolous one and a privileged one, but it's an example of something that I wouldn't have had to learn how to do if it wasn't for COVID. And I think a lot of people are learning things. And so maybe that's another tool we could give Susan, which is make a list of the skills that you've learned over COVID, not, only like making sourdough bread, but, how to negotiate about who takes out the trash. I mean, all these things that you didn't have to deal with when people were together all the time, how to get groceries when you can't go into the grocery store, right? I mean, all of these very creative things that you've been able to do. So I think that could be a great idea, is really focus on, yes, there's the grief and the loss, but what did I learn? What skills, instead of like, what did I gain, but like, what skills did I hone and learn over this time?
Yeah. What muscles did I start to build?
Exactly.
I wish it was more of my actual muscles because that's been, I saw something posted the other day that said, when COVID is over, will you go back to in-person gym, workout classes and things like that? And I'm like, God, yes, I miss my, my soul cycle and my going to the gym. There's just was something about that. And I wish I'd adapted better to doing that at home, but I am learning how to do things better. And you're right. That I love that idea of writing down skills that you've honed or learned during this time. I'd always cooked a little bit, but one of the things that I've started doing, and it's thank you to HelloFresh because, but we've been using it. I just looked the other day, we've gotten something like 30 boxes of HelloFresh during COVID. But it means I always have fresh food and I always have a recipe and I can always whip out a dinner in 30 minutes at the end of even a long day. And I love it. It's like, it's now this thing I look forward to at the end of my day. And then my husband and I sit down at a table and eat together, something we hardly
that was not
ever
happening
did.
before.
No. So, I mean, just those little things that are things actually that I think will carry forward beyond that time.
Well, I also have recommended to clients to write down like what they want to keep. So what they want to keep from COVID, what do they want to make sure, because there are things that really shifted. And I think most people that are probably listening, if you would tap them on the shoulder in February and said, what's your biggest stress? You'd say, I don't have enough time. So I would also recommend people saying, what do they want to take with them? So what are the things that you want to continue? Because again, like I was saying, that most people would think that, oh, I didn't have enough time. And so we now know what it looks like to have the most, I really hope I get to keep the like spaciousness of the weekends where I don't have things planned and I can read an entire book on the weekend. Like that is so lovely. And I never would have honestly like allowed myself to do that. And so now that I have, I hope that I can. So I really would encourage people to think about what they want to take with them too.
Yeah, it's actually a conversation that might be a great family conversation, as you start to emerge from the hibernating nest, as what do we as a family want to continue? My husband and I have talked about the cooking and the eating dinner together and the remote working. So we've started to adapt our life to a lifestyle that we like and want and have put a lot of thought into, because now we have that ability to at least count on some remote work, even when the world maybe goes back to having in-person offices.
And it's been interesting to see how many people have moved a lot of, and kind of had this desire that we kind of pushed down and we thought, oh, no, I'm not ready for that or something. And right. And so this kind of also ignited a lot, I think, for people.
Yeah. Well, and the interesting part is Although in the beginning of COVID, I thought of it as just sort of a holding pattern, a time when
Yes.
life was in pause, and
Yes.
then big changes have actually happened, during this year, as
Big-
we've been talking about throughout. Some by choice, some not as much by choice.
Right. And I wonder if part of this is, if we slow down, what is important just get, like you said, just kind of spotlight on what gets important. And again, I want to say, unless you yourself were sick or had to take care of people who were sick or lost somebody. I mean, you and I are both fortunate that no one in our close families has had that. So we've been able to talk about the golden Ann, like we've been able to have these growth experiences because we haven't been weighted down by our own personal grief. And so I think it's also just important to know that, this idea of, right now we're coming up on a year when everything shifted. And that is significant. And we live in the culture that just doesn't think emotions or feelings or trauma should be valued, and really work and output should be, so I have noticed a lot of my clients and myself at times, using work or overworking to cope with the stress. Right.
Yeah.
We're home anyway. A lot of overworking. So I really want to warn people around this anniversary, watch out, make yourself a vacation. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Like when you get down to
I'm
Florida,
guilty.
yeah,
Yeah.
like when you get down to Florida, take a few days. I think it's also going to be very hard for people to pause and not work, and, really consider taking a day or taking two, in I was brought up in Orthodox Judaism, and in Orthodox Judaism, for a year after somebody dies, there's this time where you don't celebrate and you mourn, and then on the year anniversary, you light a candle and there's special prayers. And so, I have talked to a lot of my clients about lighting candles on for me, it's March 15th, to really kind of honor those who've passed and also this time in our life. And really, ritual is incredibly important for acknowledging where we are.
I love that idea. I am going to be lighting a candle and thinking of you and thinking of
Mm,
all of my listeners and all that's happened in this year and all that's coming. We have blessings and we have challenges.
yeah,
We are all going forward. But
we
there's
will
some
move
great
through this,
tips.
and we
Yeah.
will and we will move through this. I mean, we will move through it. We will look differently when we come through it, and things will be different, but there is always forward movement. And I want people to know that along the forward movement, I'm just asking you to honor your feelings and your process as we move through this anniversary.
Yeah. And the one now I do want to, because I'm putting it on my calendar. I'm going to be lighting a candle. This episode will come out, I think, on the 15th, which is that anniversary. So if you're listening today, everybody go grab that candle, light it, and think and honor your past year and honor what's coming ahead for us. I do know that one of the positives of having this past year and time is that you have two exciting births, as we'll call them. You referenced maternity leave earlier and blew my mind. But no, it's you recently birthed your podcast, the
Yeah.
Divorce Doctor podcast, and coming in April next month is your book. So tell
Yeah.
us about both.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because my book, which is called Light at the Other Side of Divorce, Discovering the New You, really is an example of the light that can come through something so difficult and so painful. And I think it's really beautiful timing that it's going to be coming out in April when, at least for us in the Northern Hemisphere, it will be getting a bit warmer. We'll be able to be outside longer. We'll be able to congregate safely outside. So I'm really excited about this being a companion to that little step out. And people can find out about my book and sign up. Actually, if you pre-order my book, you get automatically enrolled in 3 free workshops that are exclusive to people who pre-order, about living in the afterglow of divorce, co-parenting, and dating again after divorce. So that's at my website, drelizabethcohen.com. And then my podcast is the other amazing experience that I've had over this year. I feel like I was also hibernating like the hamsters, talking to all amazing people like Susan, hers is coming out very soon around the book, and talking to them about their stories and then sharing them. And the feedback I've been getting for other people hearing other, divorce stories has been so powerful. So that's the Divorce Doctor. You can get it where any podcasts are. And it's been so beautiful to watch people's process. And just so you know, the focus of the podcast is also the light. It's focusing on what kind of light comes from the divorce process.
Well, I cannot wait for the book. I love the podcast. I've mentioned in the episodes coming out soon that I was very honored to be a guest, and I have to say, having gone through my own divorce, and it colored my life in so many ways, especially as a divorce attorney. Yeah. But I'd never sat down and unpacked all that. And so for me, it was a transformative experience just to have that opportunity to sit with you and tell my story and tell the story of that experience. So I hope that it helps somebody who listens. But your podcast is wonderful. I cannot wait for the book. And you'll be back on right around when the book is launching so that we can talk about the book specifically, everyone. But as always, Dr. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining me and my listeners.
Oh, my pleasure. And if any of your listeners, again, have any specific questions about mental health issues, feel free to reach out and we can cover it on the next podcast if they want.
You can send it to divorceandbeyondpod@gmail.com. So thank you.
Thank you.